So I expect to see more people probably coming in as we get started here, but I thought in the interest of timeliness we would start. So good evening. Thank you all for being here. I think it's evening anyway. Thank you for all being here. This is the second of our David S. Saurman Provocative Lectures for the fall. And my name's Jack Estel. I'm a lecturer here. Some of you probably know me. I'm always happy to see how many students can show up for these lectures. Before we go any further, you might check on your electronic alter ego and make sure that it's turned down so we're not interrupted tonight. I want to let everybody know that we will be having a meeting of the Barstool Economists. The Barstool Economists is an online or virtual group of people who like to share ideas about economics, but we also get together after these lectures at Flames Restaurant, which is on the corner of 4th and San Fernando. We generally can figure that there's some free pizza and beer, so if that encourages you to join us, please feel free. That will be immediately after the lecture here, and Adam will go over and spend a few minutes with us there as well. So I'll give you a chance to talk to him one-on-one if you'd like. And it also give you a chance to talk to me one-on-one if you'd like, but seldom people want to do that. I don't know what that is. Anyway, we will sponsor one more lecture this fall. Howard Root will join us on Thursday, November 8th at the same place that we are now at the same time. Mr. Root is the founder and the CEO of Vascular Solutions, Inc. He fought the Justice Department for 5 years to vindicate his company from a false prosecution. And so what Howard will talk about is just how unjust the prosecutorial discretion can be. I think you'll find it a fascinating story. I've heard parts of it. It is now a book as well. So I encourage you to join us on November the 8th. This lecture series started 17 years ago to foster our vision for higher education, and that is challenging ideas in the development of critical thinking in an environment of respectful intellectual discourse, something that is far too rare today. So please sit back and listen to Adam tonight as he discusses his efforts to make government more transparent through the use of openthebooks.com. We will provide a question and answer period at the end of his discussion. So I will walk around with a microphone. If you just hold up your hand, I will hand you the microphone and you can take it away. And I will keep track of who's in the queue. We hope that this lecture will encourage greater citizen participation in government spending and in government oversight. So let me say a few words about our speaker tonight, Adam Andraejewski. I knew I was going to, well, I got close anyway, right, Adam? Okay, I'm okay. He is the founder and CEO of openthebooks.com that seeks to put every U.S. government's spending item online, every item. He previously helped found a successful business in Illinois, eventually selling his interest to his brother in 2007. He then began to focus in public service with the idea of bringing every item in the U.S. government's, and that's local, state, and federal government, spending on to an online searchable database. His company has currently organized over 4 billion lines of government spending. And I'll let him share some of the stories that came out of his review of that spending. So can we give Adam a hand? I didn't butcher it too bad.
No, it's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jack. Thank you to Dr. Ortega for extending the invitation, to the Tower Foundation for having me in. As many of you know, I'm doing a little research probably for your class ahead of this event here this evening. I'm from Illinois, the Super Bowl of corruption. In Illinois, our #1 manufactured product is corruption. I am sure our reputation has reached California. We actually had 4 governors out of the last 9 that have gone to prison. And that includes 2, 1 Republican and 1 Democrat, that were in federal prison at the same time. It was Republican George Ryan and Democrat and you probably heard about him, Rod Blagojevich. Yes, he was the governor that wanted to sell Barack Obama's former U.S. Senate seat. We also have politicians in big cities like Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel. And Rahm Emanuel in 2011, he ran on a campaign promise to end the historic culture of corruption in City Hall in Chicago. He promised to end the concept of pay-to-play. Pay-to-play is when you give campaign cash as a vendor and you expect a city contract. He won for mayor, and then he issued an executive order right away banning any campaign cash into his campaign fund if you were a city vendor. 4 years later, when he was running for re-election in 2015, I got a call from John Stossel, who then was at the Fox News Network in New York City. And Stossel said, Adam, can you fact-check the campaign promise? And I said, yes, we can. And here's what we found. We mashed up 12 years of the city Chicago checkbook with Rahm Emanuel's campaign finance disclosures, and we found 600 city vendors gave Rahm Emanuel $7 million of campaign donations, and those vendors had reaped $2 billion in city payments. And that is a return on investment. It showed us two things. Rahm Emanuel was firmly in control of the mayor daily political machine, and it also told us that pay-to-play in Chicago was still fully legal. Now, here at San Jose State University, in your conference, you have an Illinois school, Chicago State University. And at Chicago State University, soon, they will have more employees, more public employees at the school than they have students. 2 years ago, their incoming freshman class was 86 students, and their faculty payroll at openthebooks.com, we showed 970 employees. And it only got marginally better the next year. Their incoming freshman class was 145 students, and their payroll still showed 700 employees. Illinois is the Super Bowl of corruption. If anything happens for the good of the people on public policy and politics in my state, it's entirely by accident. Now I want to share with you a little bit about my background. I grew up in a small town in central Illinois, a farming community, so I grew up walking beans, detasseling corn, and baling hay. Later, I would run for governor in Illinois in 2009 and 10. And on the campaign trail, I repeatedly said, I would rather run for governor in this corrupt state than walk beans, detassel corn, and bale hay. That's hard work. Running for governor to pursue true public service, that was a privilege. And I gained that experience at a young age, where it was deeply instilled in me the nobility of true public service. You see, when I was in the 2nd and the 4th grade, my father, as a history teacher, 5 kids at home at the time, my mother stayed home. We had no family net worth. My father stood up. Our whole family stood up against the corruption in our local Republican Party. And my father, as a conservative Democrat, took on one of the most powerful and corrupt politicians in Illinois state history. My father ran for state representative against George Ryan. Ryan would eventually become Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor, Speaker of the House, Governor, and the federal prisoner that we talked about earlier. My father ran the good government ads against Ryan, the hear no evil, see no evil, and speak no evil monkeys. And Ryan ran the full-page ads against my father's small ads, saying, vote for the good government team, vote for George Ryan. Sadly, my father lost both of those elections. But it did deeply instill in me the nobility of true public service. In order to pursue that passion, in 1996, my brother and I, we started a publishing company from scratch, from our apartments, and I want to tell you the story because it is a seminal moment in my life. starting this business, and we had no net worth. The first year, everything that we owned was upside down in this business. We were upside down. Everything that we had saved in our lives to that moment. At the end of 3 years, we should have been celebrating. We had $1 million worth of sales. But that was the year we nearly lost the business. We nearly ran out of money. Because when you're an entrepreneur, when you're starting from scratch, everybody gets paid first. You get paid last, if at all, and you have to pay the bills in advance and well in advance, and this had drained our accounts. We survived that moment. But for another dime's worth of taxes, regulations, and fees, we would have been gone in year 3. For the first 6 years of our business, every single one of our employees out-earned my brother and I. Through 5 years, we'd make a little bit, and it would go back into the business on what's called a capital call. But in year 6, we finally hit $5 million worth of sales. And by year 10, we hit $20 million worth of sales, and we were an overnight success. That's the American dream. It's always impossible, but for sheer force of will. At the end of 10 years, we had 150 employees. Most of our sales reps were women, and it was good jobs. They out-earned what the average doctor in Illinois made in a year, and most of them out-earned their husbands as well. That company would have been gone in year 3, but for another dime's worth of taxes, regulation, and fees. And that's why I vowed to dedicate the rest of my life. If government is going to tax us and take away some of our individual freedom, tax us and take away some of the sacrifice that our families help us in business to do, then they have the obligation to spend our tax dollars honestly, cleanly, efficiently, and to truly use those tax dollars to help people who have real needs. So it's a nonpartisan agenda at openthebooks.com. Here's our mission. We want to put every dime online in real time. Our charge comes from the United States Constitution. It's Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, and it states, a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. And today it's the internet age. It's the age of big data. There's a clear interpretation, and that is to post every dime online in real time, to open the books at every level of government across the entire country, to empower citizens, to empower you and I, we the people, to be able to hold the political class at every level in this country accountable for their tax and spend decisions. We've had a lot of success capturing data. We have built the world's largest private database of government spending. Here's what it's comprised of. At the federal level, we've captured all disclosed government transactions, contracts, loans, grants, insurance payments, farm subsidies, all the way back to the year 2001. On federal bureaucrat payroll, we've captured all disclosed, about 2 million federal employees every single year, all the way back to 2007 on salaries and on their bonuses. In 48 out of the 50 states, we have at least 1 year of checkbook spending. Most states, we have 10 or 11 or 12 years worth of state checkbook spending. The only states we don't have are North Carolina and California. In 60,000 units of local government across the country, we've captured 20 million public employee salary and pension records. It's the largest public employee salary and pension database in the world. Our honorary chairman is the legendary former U.S. Senator from Oklahoma, Dr. Tom Coburn. And think about Coburn's leadership. You've heard of the Bridge to Nowhere. The Bridge to Nowhere was a $300 million earmark that would build a bridge from mainland Alaska to an island that served less than 100 people. And as a freshman in the United States Senate in 2004, Senator Coburn stood armed with an amendment that would stop that earmark. And the legendary Republican U.S. Senator from Alaska, Ted Stevens, that night was irate with Coburn. Said, "Coburn, you're a freshman. Get your amendment off the floor." He barreled down the aisle of the Senate, red-faced and fist clenched. And Coburn refused to budge. He brought it to a vote, and he lost the vote that night. Only 17 Republicans voted with him. It was 83-17. But Coburn knew that when the American people woke up the next morning, and if they found out where their tax dollars were going, he would eventually win that fight. And they did. And then they used that halo example to end the practice of earmarking as we know it. And that's the model. Coburn was fierce on transparency, reached across the aisle with then Illinois Senator Barack Obama, and opened the federal checkbook to sunshine for the first time ever. He understood that transparency was only the first step. He used the Senate rules to stop thousands of his colleagues' pork barrel expenditure pieces of legislation. What he couldn't stop, he embarrassed his colleagues in his annual waste book report. You remember the example of the $1 million of federal money that was spent on a grant to one of the nation's leading research outfits to put a shrimp on a treadmill. So we are carrying forth at openthebooks.com this terrific legacy of Senator Coburn. He was a small state senator, but by the time he left the United States Senate in 2013, Time magazine put Coburn on their 100 most influential people in the world list. And this is why I am hopeful and optimistic about our future. Because transparency and knowledge is power. And we believe that the open government movement is revolutionizing United States public policy and politics. In Illinois in 2011, we got started by posting nearly every single public employee at every level of Illinois government on our website at openthebooks.com. And very rapidly, we found that a school district treasurer, his pay in one year went from $164,000 to the next year at $296,000. But this was in Cook County. Now, the residents of that school district knew that wasn't right, but the prosecutor in Cook County cannot find public corruption anywhere. That's the county of Chicago. They raised their voices. Eventually, there was an investigation, and I'm proud to say that he was indicted and pled guilty, serving an 8-year sentence in jail for stealing up to $1.5 million over a 20-year period. In 2013, we took the entire federal checkbook, and for the first time ever, and we handed out the card here today, we put it into a mobile application so you can review it from the palm of your hand on your cell phone or mobile device. You can also review the 2.7 million public employees in the state of California, hyper-localized to wherever you're standing in the state or a zip code of your choosing, and a lot of other information in that app. When this broke in 2013, my op-ed was published at the Wall Street Journal, and I called on citizens to review the information, to ask questions, demand answers of the political class. Oftentimes, we have no idea where our tax dollars are going. A year went past, and it was 2014, and I realized that I hadn't taken my own advice. So I opened up an oversight investigation of a unit of government, a public body in my neighborhood, a junior college, the second largest college in Illinois, the College of DuPage. And I knew that the then governor, Pat Quinn, was coming to deliver the commencement address on the campus. So I simply filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the emails from the school's president to the Board of Trustees in the period leading up to the governor's visit. And we unearthed an email strategy from the president to the board. to bring political support to the incumbent governor in exchange for a $20 million state construction grant. And when we unearthed that email, we stopped that grant. Even in Illinois, that's not legal. But we weren't done. We found that in a 7-year period, they spent $600 million rebuilding every building on campus. We took a look at what they built. They built more office space for the college executives than they did classroom space for the students. They built an upscale French restaurant complete with a world-class wine cellar and hired a French sommelier. And then they went into that restaurant, the administrators of this district, the executives of this district, and they billed off up to $300,000 worth of fine dining against the scholarship fund, against the taxpayers, against the student tuition fund. Filet mignon, creme brulee, champagne, and wine. The college in a 7-year period said that they were disclosing every dime, that they were being fully transparent with all of their spending. But we found during this period they hid $100 million through an old style of accounting called imprest, which is petty cash accounting, and they pushed $100 million through that account. It was hidden spending. And what can be in $100 million? When the president of the school went to Botswana, Africa, and shot an African elephant, taxpayers paid for his global satellite positioning phones. When we took a look at $250,000 worth of wine and wine accessories in that fund, it was tagged as instructional supplies. We found that the president of the school's country club dues were pushed through this account, and that wasn't in his contract. We found that the chief radio station engineer, unbeknownst to the accounting department at the school, had opened up his own company and on a no-bid basis did business with himself to the tune of $500,000. When we pushed that story to the Chicago Tribune, they did 2 front-page news stories, and I'm proud to say that that radio station engineer, he was indicted and pled guilty. He's serving 9 years in prison and had to pay back restitution of $400,000. We believe that the open government movement is revolutionizing United States public policy and politics. Our model even works in blue states like Oregon. In Oregon, in the lead up to the 2016 election, and for the second most powerful position in the state of Oregon, next in line for governor of Oregon, is the Secretary of State's position. And the Democrat running for that was the powerful commissioner at the Bureau of Labor, Brad Avakian. And you know Brad Avakian. Brad Avakian was the regulator that bankrupted the wedding cake baker in Oregon. And we received a tip that he was using state employees, state resources on his campaign. And we built out at Forbes, where I'm a senior contributor, we built out a troubling fact pattern of where he was using state employees on state time on his campaign. When we published this, the largest newspaper in Oregon reached out to the campaign, and the spokesman admitted it. He said, yes, we do. We use state employees on state time, but they make up the time later. And even in Oregon, that's not legal. And Brad Avakian is the first Democrat to lose statewide since the year 2000 in Oregon. Our model even works in red states like Wyoming. Wyoming gets an F in transparency. And this year at OpenTheBooks.com, we got serious about those Republicans in Wyoming that were forestalling transparency and constricting public financial information. We had to sue the state's top auditor. She refused to give us the state checkbook. Now, this auditor is a powerful politician. She had won twice for auditor, literally with 92% of the vote. Those are the margins that Saddam Hussein wins by in the former Iraq. She's not running for office this year. We sued her for that checkbook, and I'm proud to say they've already produced the first year out of the 5 years of production that they're working on. Our model even works at the largest federal agencies. You probably remember the scandal at Veterans Affairs that started in 2014. At the very nexus of the scandal, a sick veteran couldn't get in to see a doctor because the VA claimed there weren't enough doctors, but the official books showed no wait times. So hundreds of millions of dollars of ill-gotten bonuses could be paid out. Congress threw tens of billions of dollars at the VA since 2014, and we fact-checked what they did with it. In the summer of 2016, our auditors found $20 million at the VA during this period when 1,000 sick veterans died while waiting to see a doctor and were waitlisted for an appointment, that the VA spent $20 million on high-end luxury artwork. It was 27-foot Christmas trees priced like cars, $21,000. It was sculptures priced like 5-bedroom homes. We found 2 sculptures right out here in Palo Alto at the VA medical facility that serves blind veterans. They purchased 2 fancy sculptures for $700,000. Our findings rocketed to Good Morning America. They went to the Senate, powerful Senate Judiciary Chairman Chuck Grassley out of Iowa, who wrote a 3-page oversight letter to the then VA Secretary Robert McDonald. And within 34 days of Good Morning America airing our findings, the Secretary apologized for the purchases and instituted new rules to stop the practice on a go-forward basis. And that's the power of transparency. Now, many of you have probably seen over the course of the last couple of weeks, if you read the Wall Street Journal, if you read USA Today, our open letter to President Donald Trump urging the president to declare war on waste. This is a signature issue of great importance for everybody in this room, because Congress and the president, they're not spending my money. They're spending your money and your children's money. Our national debt is now $21.5 trillion. Let's put that in perspective. For every single person sitting in this room, that's $65,000 you owe. I've got 3 little girls at home and a wife, my family of 5. Our share of the national debt is $320,000. You tell me the plan where any of that gets paid back. Here's the strategy that we outlined to the president on spending. First, post all White House expenditures. Lead by example and put it up in real time. Second, cut federal agency waste. And on page 2 of this double-facing page ad in the Wall Street Journal and USA Today, we outline 100 examples, outrageous examples of nonpartisan, easily identifiable government waste. And here's the third part of the plan. It's my favorite part of the plan. The president should then report his findings, how he's defending the American taxpayer, cutting waste, fraud, corruption, and taxpayer abuse. And we urge him to use Twitter. Here's a sample tweet that he could put out there. Spending money rather than saving money. Sad! Exclamation point. He doesn't have to wait for a reform moment in this country on spending. The president should create the reform moment. Let's talk about some of the areas on spending that can be reformed or cut. The federal government admits in the 20 largest agencies that since 2004, on mistaken and improper payments, they have paid out $1.2 trillion. That's a stunning number. Let's put that in perspective. That's 2 full years worth of Department of Defense military budget spending. I want to give you an example of some of these mistaken payments and overpayments. At the Department of Education, just in the last 2 fiscal years, they have overpaid $11 billion on student loans and Pell Grants. Raise your hand if you've received more money than you've asked for by the Department of Ed. Wow, we have some honest people in here. That's great. I wasn't expecting any hands. Of course, you could raise your hand, and there is not going to be any clawback, quite possibly. At the United States Department of Agriculture, over the course of the last 2 fiscal years on 60 federal farm subsidy programs, the Department of Ag admits to nearly $4 billion worth of overpayments to farmers on farm subsidies. Talk about an abject lack of in-house financial controls in the agencies. This should be priority number 1. Let's take it to the other side. Let's take the last 7 days of September. The last 7 days of September is the last week of a fiscal year at the federal government. It ends September 30th. And they operate under budget rules of use it or lose it spending. And what that means is if you don't spend your budget this year, you lose that amount of money in your budget for next year. So you've got these agency heads that go on an end-of-year spending spree at the end of September. According to data that we've compiled at openthebooks.com, they spent $50 billion. I was happy to do the National Public Radio Marketplace segment on this. According to our data, 1 out of every $9 of contractual spending in the fiscal year was spent in the last week. The United States Army bought $7,000 worth of fidget spinners, blowing out their fidget spinner budget. They bought tens of thousands of dollars worth of snowboards and paddle boards. The VA bought $20,000 worth of shuffleboards. The State Department spent $150,000 buying whiskey and wine gifts to close out their booze budget. You see, we have no idea where our tax dollars are going. The way back for America, it must come from we the people. In America, the citizen is sovereign. We are supposed to tell them how fast to drive that car, where to turn, when to hit the brakes, and when to stop. You and I, we need to raise our voice. Let's talk about the federal bureaucracy and our 100 examples of outrageous waste. It cannot go without mentioning the pay, perquisites, and pension benefits of the federal bureaucracy. It's expensive. On 2 million disclosed federal bureaucrats, last year we paid out $1.1 million a minute, $500 million a day. There are 30,000 federal bureaucrats that out-earn every governor of the 50 states, and that threshold salary is $190,000 per year. In 78 large federal agencies, the average salary exceeds $100,000. But it's not only about the salary. They also get bonuses. And last year, 1 million federal public employees received a performance bonus. And many people don't think government's running that well. And they ask, how can 1 million federal bureaucrats get a performance bonus? Well, we looked into that, and we found a government accountability audit from 2015, and it showed that 99.7% of all federal workers are rated highly successful. And that's impossible. The advertised purity of Ivory soap is only 99.6%. And the union contracts shield the transparency of those performance bonuses. You and I, we don't know who received how much for what. It's all undisclosed, shielded by the federal union contracts. It's not only about the high salaries and the performance bonuses, but it's also about the paid time off. After your 3-year anniversary, the average federal bureaucrat gets 43 days of paid time off. That's 10 holidays, 13 sick days, and 20 vacation days. And this isn't France. We estimate that little perk costs the American taxpayer every year $25 billion. So when our report launched, I was called to the Executive Office of the President in Washington, D.C., the Office of Management and Budget, to a private briefing, and they have said the President is interested in scaling back that paid time off benefit. And I suggested, rather than 8.5 weeks, 43 days of paid time off, just scale it back to 6 weeks. No one in the private sector is getting 6 weeks of paid time off. And that savings over a 10-year period would be $60 billion that we estimate. There is plenty of places to cut in the federal budget. We came out with an oversight report, and a lot of this made our 100 examples of waste. Every single year, the federal agencies dole out over $600 billion worth of grants. And that's equivalent to the entire military Department of Defense budget, $600 billion. We found there's a grant for everybody. If you're a child in China and if you want to learn how to cross your busy street in China, the American taxpayer funded a $200,000 grant to create a virtual reality platform to teach Chinese kids to cross their busy streets. Now, I'm Polish, but I don't think we should be creating VR platforms with public money to help Polish kids in Warsaw cross their streets either. If you are a prostitute in California, the American taxpayer put $1.4 million into teaching California prostitutes sex education, and they could probably teach the class. If you've got your own airplane, and if you want to join the Hollywood elite and fly that into Martha's Vineyard and in Massachusetts on Cape Cod, the American taxpayer put $9.2 million last year into that airport at Martha's Vineyard, and that's a place they can start paying their own way. NASA, $2.5 million into an elementary school cartoon called Space Racers. They put $1 million into a grant that prepared America's religion for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. Over at the National Science Foundation, they spent $1 million studying where it hurts the most to be stung by a bee. There are pages and pages of waste, fraud, corruption, and taxpayer abuse. And it is time to name names. So when these grants flowed in to a congressional district, we put the member's name on that district. And we got pushback from some Republican congressmen. One wrote us a cease and desist letter. He says, you can't hold me accountable for this grant. I didn't even know what was going on. This $1 million of United States taxpayer money that flowed to a recipient in his district to create a virtual shoe fitting piece of software. So you could, this is a private sector application. You could shop online for shoes and virtually fit your foot into their shoe. But that's exactly the point. We pushed back against that cease and desist letter. He's elected by we the people to watch the federal activity in his district, and he didn't even know about it. $1 million. Let's take some big examples. We studied the grant making into the 8 elite schools over a 6-year period of the Ivy League. The Ivy League, they don't need taxpayer help. They got $120 billion in their endowments. They can't make the argument they need our money. But over a 6-year period, $22 billion of grants flowed into the 8 elite schools of the Ivy League. And it's not only about the Ivy League, it's also our most successful corporations. Over the last 3 fiscal years, into the Fortune 100 companies, $3.2 billion of our money subsidized the Fortune 100. It's companies like Boeing, with $100 billion of annual revenue. They received $750 million of grants, subsidies for the Boeing Corporation. We believe that the open government movement is revolutionizing United States public policy and politics. How much time do I have? To speak or Q&A? Okay. So I just want to go through some of our oversight reports over the last couple of years. So one of the questions that I'm faced frequently by members, folks that hear our talk, and the question is, where is government running well? And we do quarterly oversight reports on tranches of federal spending, and we try to answer that question. So here are some of the things that we have found over the course of the last 4 years in our oversight investigations. You know, could the EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, be running well? Well, we found that in an 8-year period, they spent $92 million on high-end luxury furniture. So let's get this straight. For all of us, it's IKEA. But for the EPA bureaucrats, it's $700 pencil holders and $8,000 executive desks. We pushed this story to the Fox News channel. They reached out to the EPA spokesman, and here's the response. Yes, we spent $92 million in an 8-year period on high-end luxury furniture. We negotiated new leases, new office space. The new lease is less money than the old lease. The old furniture wouldn't fit in the new office space. So on a net basis, you, the American taxpayer, you are ahead of the game. That's the attitude far too often from the public sector. Nobody is tightening the belt. We did an oversight report of the United States Small Business Administration, the SBA, and here's what we found. We found $144 million in a 7-year period of SBA lending. And you know the SBA, they're supposed to fund mom and pop businesses on Main Street. Those men and women who have great ideas but cannot find financing in the private marketplace. So $144 million went into zip code 90210 in Beverly Hills, California. It was $4 million that went to their exclusive diamond broker. $1.1 million went to their Bentley auto dealer. $1.2 million went to their cosmetic surgeon doing Botox. We found $200 million worth of SBA lending flowed to America's private country clubs, golf clubs, swim clubs, beach clubs, and tennis clubs across the country. We found $9 billion didn't go to Main Street. It went to Wall Street investment firms with no transparency on what they did after that. And make no mistake, we should never demonize success in this country, but you and I, we don't need to subsidize it either. We did a launching in the summer of 2016 on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal in a premium placement. We gave oversight to the militarization of rank-and-file federal agencies. We found in a 7-year period that $1.5 billion went to federal agencies that were non-military agencies, and $400 million flowed to not only non-military, but also non-traditional law enforcement agencies. The traditional law enforcement agencies are Homeland Security and the Department of Justice and all the sub-agencies underneath them. So 53 rank-and-file federal agencies spent $400 million purchasing guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. It's agencies like the Internal Revenue Service, who spent $17.5 million, and in special circumstances, their special agents can carry AR-15s. It's like Veterans Affairs. Up till 1996, the VA, they didn't have any officers with arrest and firearm authority. But since 1996, they've put their own police force in play. And now there's about 3,000 officers in their VA police force. And they've spent $15 million on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Again, during a period when they were failing on their core mission of providing basic health care to the men and women who had fought for us, and we had promised them this health care. The second finding of our report was there are now more federal officers with arrest and firearm authority than there are United States Marines. Again, this is outside of the Department of Defense. So there is over 200,000 federal officers with arrest and firearm authority, and that compares up to only 182,000 Marines. In this era, with this president, he performs on his promises. So he is increasing the head counts of federal officers with arrest and firearm authority, specific to the agencies on the border and on immigration. And they're adding tens of thousands of new officers to that head count. That is something to watch. Another point to watch are these 53 traditional rank-and-file, paper-pushing regulatory agencies who spent the $400 million on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. And the president, in his June 2018 reorganization of the federal agencies, he's adopted something that we talked about, which is taking away from agencies like the IRS or like the Department of Education, which has 67 federal officers with arrest and firearm authority, and transferring those police abilities and authorizations back to where they should be, which is the United States Marshals. So our policies are having an effect. We just came out with an oversight report called Harvesting U.S. Farm Subsidies. The U.S. Farm Subsidy Program was a program of good intentions. It was put in place during the Great Depression with two goals. One, to preserve the nation's food supply, and the other one was to safeguard the family farmer. And what we found in our report was that the program has become so lucrative that wealthy farm heirs, large corporations, and investors are now using the federal subsidy to maximize their returns on farm ground investment. In fact, we found that farm subsidies are flowing into America's urban areas where there are no farms. $750 million in the last 3 fiscal years flowed into America's urban areas. We define that as a population center more than 250,000 residents. It's like Chicago, where there's 1,200 city dwellers that soaked up $8 million worth of farm subsidy. A classic case is a downtown dentist who owns a quail farm downstate, and to maximize his federal subsidies, he put bees on it and is now a bee rancher as well. We found that this happened all over the country. We found just in one fiscal year, the top recipient received $10 million worth of farm subsidy. So we are a long way from the original purpose of these programs. And people say, well, how is this so lucrative, and how does this happen, and why isn't there reform? Well, we identified 12 members of Congress. They all sit on the Agriculture Committee, and they're all Republicans, and they soaked up $700,000 worth of farm subsidies last year. Now, our honorary chairman, when he was in the United States Senate, he thought that's an ethics violation. And he brought it up to the Ethics Committee, and they laughed at him. It takes courage to bring forth reform. I started this talk out talking about Coburn's Bridge to Nowhere moment, where they used that eventually to end earmarks as we knew it, and how enraged the Alaskan Senator Ted Stevens was at Coburn for trying to stop his earmark in Alaska. That was his earmark, Ted Stevens' home state of Alaska. Coburn knew that there would be retaliation, and there was. You see, Coburn, he had delivered 4,000 babies in his small town in Oklahoma. But the Republicans in the United States Senate stripped him of his ability to practice medicine as a United States Senator. I want to close with this Coburn story. After delivering 4,000 babies, Coburn used to talk about on the law of large numbers. Some of those deliveries wouldn't go the way that you anticipated. He said when the baby's heartbeat on the monitor got up to 135 beats to 140 beats a minute, he had to make a decision. He had 3 minutes to make a decision to save the life of the mother, to save the life of the baby. He said you either went for the forceps, you did a C-section. He said the point was you had to make a decision. You had 3 minutes to take action. And Coburn said, with the amount of federal debt, with the amount of federal spending today, this is America's 3-minute moment. You and I, we have to take action. We have to raise our voices. We have to insist that our elected politicians declare war on waste. Thank you. I'm open for your questions.
So a few years ago, I was fortunate to meet Senator Mike Lee from Utah at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas. And I proposed to him something that he liked and other people liked, that the government would send every year to every taxpayer how they spend the money in a chart. So this is how much money it was spent like this, like a pie graph. And then at the end, it would say, we borrowed on your behalf $21.5 trillion, and this, you as a taxpayer owe $65,000 that you're going to pay with interest. So even though you don't have to actually pay them off, the taxpayers would be notified, would know about it. And he said it was a great idea, and then nothing ever happened.
So I would just respond to that. So in the last election, whether you voted for Bernie Sanders on the center left or Donald Trump on the center right, both camps ran on the fundamental idea that the system is rigged. And many of you believe that the system is rigged for insiders because it is. And that, my friend, just may be too much transparency for the American people. That's what a politician would think. I love your idea. I think it's a great idea. And that actually is the mission of OpenTheBooks.com. People fundamentally understand the system is rigged, that something is wrong. And we at openthebooks.com want to show you just how bad it is. Now, all of you are studying for your next career, and I just want to put out my favorite position out of 20 million salaries that we've captured at openthebooks.com. My favorite position, my dream job, is to become a boat harbor pilot captain in Los Angeles. You steer the big ships in, help them navigate the channel into the harbor. And last year, 11 of them made over $375,000, and the top one made $500,000. And that's because the power of the public sector union in negotiating their contract. Question? Yeah. I'm not. So I don't have the details on the specific proposition that you talk about, but from what you've said, is it a tax hike proposition? So a 1% increase. Okay, so here's our position on any of these things. Transparency before taxes. Now, this should be a no-brainer. It should be a nonpartisan idea. You have to open the books, show us where you're spending our money before you get any more of our money. I think that's pretty basic. The state of California refuses, through 2 California comptrollers, Betty Yee and John Chang, to release line by line state agency expenditures to our organization. They're only one of 2 states, as I mentioned. The other one's North Carolina. So transparency before taxes. Okay. Next question. Oh, we got one.
Hi, thank you. So one idea I found interesting from your lecture was the lose it or use it idea. And I found that interesting because at San Jose State we have something similar where if you purchase a meal plan from San Jose State, you're rewarded with what they call goal points. And goal points are essentially points you use at the eateries around campus so you get to eat with the points. Now, if you don't use the points in the semester you purchase them, they don't roll over. So my question to you is, like, so there's no funds that roll over from quarter to quarter or fiscal year to fiscal year? Was that confusing? I just wanted to know if there's funds that roll over into the next year.
Right. I mean, that's the whole purpose of spending out these budgets, is because those funds don't roll and they'll lose it for the next year. So it gets so crazy that on the calendar change from September 30th to October 1st, the spending actually rolls across the country. So first, the federal bureaucrats handling the contracts, it hits midnight on the East Coast, and then it hits the Midwest, and finally they're sending emails and they're calling their colleagues on the West Coast to finally get their contractual orders taken care of before it rolls midnight in California. So that's what goes on.
So about Cobran, you said that he did something great, in regards to like a woman like giving birth. So, what else was it you said about him?
So I think, Coburn was a legendary United States senator. I think I make the point that he came from a small state, Oklahoma. And he got to the Senate in 2004, and when he left in 2014, so roughly a 10-year period, he made such an impact that Time magazine listed him as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And his impact resulted from transparency and from accountability.
Okay, so I realized that a lot of government agencies, they don't spend our tax money the way effectively. What can we do about it as taxpayers? Like when we see our money not being used efficiently.
It's an excellent question. What can we do about it? So we can't complain about Washington, D.C. or Sacramento till we have good government where we live, where we have reputation, where we know the relationships, where we can actually get things done. So here's the model. And I think this is one of the most robust watchdog models in the country. We have helped pioneer it in Illinois, that over the course of the last 4.5 years, 320 elected and local officials have fled in the face of this watchdog model. And it's something that citizens all across the country need to do, embrace, and bring accountability to their local public officials. It starts with open data. And when you review that, you will have questions. And you have to ask the public official or elected official to answer your question. And oftentimes you'll have to demand that, and the demand of the answer will require you to network up to 50 to 500. In that College of DuPage example, we networked up to 500 people into those public meetings to get answers to our questions. That becomes a media event. When the lights of the media and the heat from regular citizens is brought to bear on the issue, we have found that the public officials cannot, on the merits, justify their spending decisions, and they flee their posts. Here is the rule that needs to be enforced. It's called Dillon's Law. And Dillon's Law says that a public body cannot spend money unless they have express authority from a statute. So just ask, if you want to know what to do, on open data, when you have a question, just ask one question of the public official. Where in the law do you have the power to make that expenditure? They'll try to answer in a number of different ways, but insist on actually reading the statute that they claim gives the authority to make the expenditure. It's that powerful single question that naturally limits government to the expenditures that are authorized by statute. And any of us can do it. And it reorders what in Illinois and in California is an unequal power relationship. Right now, our politicians think they're the boss of us. Things are upside down. They need to be reminded, we, the citizen, the individual is sovereign, and our rights don't come from government. Our founding documents tell us that our rights come from God, not government. We're endowed with these rights. Here's the second thing you can do. File a Freedom of Information Act request, an open records request, and remind the public official it's not they don't own it. The public body doesn't own the emails that you're requesting. They don't own the financial accounting ledgers that you're requesting. When I file that request with the comptroller in the state of California, they're acting like they own the information. I'm the citizen. I'm sovereign. We paid for that. We own it. We're following a statutory process to take possession of public records that we own. We already own them. And we need to insist on the receipt of those records. And that's what we do at openthebooks.com. We enforce transparency law. And far too many times, like with the Comptroller of California, we simply have to ask the question, has America reached the point where the law only applies to the private sector? You run a stop sign, you violate a law, you don't pay your taxes, and rightfully so, the long arm of the law will rapidly catch up with you. We need to insist our elected and public officials simply follow the law.
My question is about tax exemption, which seems highly relatable to tax spending. Is there any legal precedence for transparency in nonprofit organizations who are exempt from taxes, but yet many seem to be run like businesses and are creating huge profits, have large payrolls, and just kind of curious of that transparency.
That's kind of my beef with the Ivy League. So at American Transparency, our website's openthebooks.com. We're a public charity. We're an IRS-recognized 501c3 organization. We don't take government money. I mean, could you imagine if we did? We would be open to the charge of pay to play, right? If government was funding us, how could we give government oversight? So we have an iron wall. We only take private funds and no government money. Conversely, you have the 8 schools of the Ivy League and many other institutions organized as 501c3 public educational charities. And they are dialed in to government checkbooks. You raise a question as to whether or not there should be more transparency amongst these private organizations. At openthebooks.com, we believe in greater government transparency and that the private sector has enough transparency, and we need to level the playing field by actually capturing and opening the books on government and giving that oversight. That said, if you take, there are many charities that only exist on the revenue from either state or federal government. And I do think that they should show us where they spend that public money.
Hi. You claimed earlier that one of the boat harbor captains earns up to $375,000 in the LA harbor.
Yes.
Okay, so
So 10 of
right.
the top one makes about $500,000 if I remember right,
correct.
and then there's 10 that average $375,000 apiece.
Okay, so building off that statement, I was wondering how Open the Books can provide information to make like that looks like an excessive amount, but in reality, it takes 4 years to first acquire that license to get there, then another 3, then another 2 to acquire the first mate's license. Now that is almost equivalent to working as hard as a doctor, whereas $375,000 almost is about a reasonable amount for that amount of schooling that can be only acquired at a certain maritime academies, such as the ones offered in Vallejo and Los Angeles and New York. So with all of that coming to conclusion, how can $375,000 be like that information not look ludicrous for how much school and almost like all this schooling that these people have to do to become a harbor freight captain? Sorry, and I forgot to add that they have to pay over $100,000 in insurance to guide multi-million-dollar vessels because it's almost like a malpractice insurance.
Right. Look, I want to be very clear with this. I think it's absolutely outrageous that those port harbor boat captains make up to $500,000 per year. And I don't think under any circumstance whatsoever they can be compared to a doctor. This shows you, this is a specific example of the influence of public sector unions driving wages way out of line with market forces. Here's another one. In the city of New York, the school district janitors out-earn the principals in the New York City public schools. you can be a janitor in the New York City public schools, and we push this to the New York Post, and make up to $210,000 a year. Again, because of the power of the public sector unions in negotiating those contracts. Oh, we got a microphone?
Just curious, this could be a very big question, so I'm totally fine if you want to just keep it short. But what do you see what do you predict, like the Libertarian Party heading towards in the next 8 to 10 years in terms of influence and gating like followers in terms of ideas such as cutting spending? Because Sanders and Trump, as you said, they ran on it and it was like a huge following as the campaign went on. So what do you see over the next decade or so? Do you see them gaining more seats in Congress or in the Senate? What's your position?
So, at openthebooks.com, there's an iron wall between our oversight activity and politics. And what you're asking is kind of a political question. So I'm just going to broaden it, not specific to the libertarians, but to any third-party effort to gain power at the ballot box. And so I don't think it's a secret. I think, the two political parties have major challenges in front of them, in part because most people don't see much difference. That's what we see in the spending data at openthebooks.com. For example, over the course of the last fiscal year, Republicans control all levers of congressional and federal appropriation. Both houses of Congress and the presidency are in Republican control. So let's analyze what happened after the Barack Obama administration when Republicans railed against all of that spending. So the first thing that happened was not this spring, this spring, the Republicans passed the omnibus spending bill, which took all the Obama administration spending and then added on more. While the Supreme Court hearings were going on the nomination, what we didn't hear about, the Republicans and Democrats got together on the federal budget for the next fiscal year, and they passed not an omnibus bill, but a minibus bill that they negotiated to spend more money on the Department of Defense. And the trade was, for the Democrats, more money on the Department of Education and Health and Human Services and other agencies like that. So the minibuses spent more money than the omnibus spent, and then they pushed the rest of the spending after the elections. So you have the minibus spending more money than the omnibus spending more money under Republican control than the Obama administration. People just don't see much of a difference. So I think there is an opportunity. It's difficult. It's difficult to get traction, but there is an opportunity for other voices.
I would like to suggest that there might be a different way of looking at trade unions and other lobby groups. You talk about the power of the public sector unions, but you could equally talk about the power of the defense contractors. You could talk about the power of all manner of lobbies, including farmers who receive government grants and subsidies, irrespective of whether or not it's, quote, waste. And it seems to me that what we should be doing is focusing on the power of government to bestow favors. And the only reason why we have powerful public sector unions is because the legislatures give them that power and respond to it.
It's a fair point. So specific to the military-industrial complex crossed with the Fortune 100, we're going to come out with, between now and January, an oversight report on the federal funding of the Fortune 100. I alluded to it a little bit. In the last 3 fiscal years, on subsidies, it's been $3.2 billion that flowed to the Fortune 100. The Fortune 100, and it's 96% contracts, heavily weighted towards the Department of Defense on military contracts. And every single year, Fortune 100 companies on contracts and grants and direct payments collect over $100 billion of payments from the federal government. And I think this is what Eisenhower feared in terms of a military-industrial complex. To put that in perspective, $100 million is what all federal agencies send to the state government of California. So that's a massive, massive amount of money.
I was under the impression that the state of California had to publish a line item budget every year. And so I was wondering, in what way is that inadequate for your purposes?
You can hide a lot of corruption in a line item in a budget.
And so
Again, I'm from Illinois, right? So we early on at openthebooks.com, we made a strategic decision that we wanted to see the individual transactions and not budgetary line items, exactly for this reason. For instance, that junior college I mentioned, it was a 6-year period, $100 million flowed through a budget line item called impressed account. There was a lot of corruption hidden within that impressed account on that budgetary line item. That's just one example. Budgets, to me, are essentially worthless for our oversight. Sometimes they can help shine a light on some aggregate macro spending that's flowing, and you can track some money that way, but I want to see the gory details. And that's why our mission is to look at government spending like you do in the private sector. I mentioned my private sector business experience of going from scratch to building a $20 million publishing company. You squeeze out in the private sector because you have a vested interest to do so on the profit motive. You try to squeeze out all excessive and wasteful spending, and you do that by looking at things on a transactional basis. And we want to bring this style, this culture, to the public sector.
Very quick question. I was just curious, what is the history? How did you get started? What was your motivation? How did you end up doing this?
It's a great question. So, I was formed by that experience when I was in the 2nd and 4th grade when my father ran against Illinois corruption and George Ryan. So my passion was always public policy and politics. But our family had no money, and my father lost because, there was just no ability to get out the message the way George Ryan had the ability to get out the message. So I thought, I'll establish myself in business first, then I can't be bought, we'll have seed capital, and we'll be able to, rightly and truthfully lead on public policy. And so when I sold my shares of that company in 2007, that was the moment. I did a little better than I thought I would, and I had what I call insulation. So I could make true call on proper policy to defend the American taxpayer and dedicate my life to public service. So I looked around for an idea. And in corrupt Illinois, I thought if we could just open the books and expose it all, the rats will flee, good people will be empowered for good decisions, and bad actors will start self-censoring their bad actions. So I went around and I pioneered a model of asking school districts to post their own checkbooks on their own websites. And we went 26-0. Nobody took a public vote that ever voted against this, and we put up over $1 billion worth of Illinois school district spending in 2008 by asking them to make the good government decision to post it on their own website. I trained volunteers to do that, and that model was eventually studied at Harvard Business School. I used that amongst my private sector success. I used that public policy success to run statewide for governor of Illinois in 2010. And nobody gave me a chance. I mean, I knew probably 15 elected officials in the entire state. I had no natural base, but I ran on ideas. And nobody votes for a guy named Andraejewski because they think it's a great last name. But they vote on policy. and I ran on two themes. Every day I'm online in real time, which you recognize. We've carried this forward now on a national basis, and I also ran on the concept of following that transparency with a forensic audit, with a deep audit, an evidentiary audit, an audit that follows the money, and an audit that holds up in court. And the people of Illinois were ready for reform. It was my first run for office. We did really well. I lost by 5% of the vote, 40,000 votes in a state of 13 million people. And I did better than anyone expected. And then I swore off politics to carry forth this mission, first in Illinois and then across the entire country. And now that's where we're at.
Any other questions? Well, good. I'll get to ask the last question. So what's your 5-year plan? Where do you want to be in 5 years with openthebooks.com?
So I can't see 5 years. But we have an internal goal by January 1st of 2020 to be the most impactful public policy organization in the country. And I think we can do it because we are holding all the spending. We open the books, we audit the books, and the audits make national news. So we are ramping up our oversight ability in-house. Right now, everything I talked about, our oversight team is 5 people, 4 people plus me. So our entire budget goes for data capture. We have the data, now we just have to look at it. And when we look at it, we do make national news. So I think we can get there by January 1st of 2020. I want to invite all of you to join the transparency revolution. And remember, it's your money. Join us. Thank you.